Welcome, everyone, to another Voices with Vervaeke. I'm here with someone that many of you have heard me mention multiple times in multiple contexts, my series and talks I'm giving. This is my friend and former colleague, former only in that he's now retired, Marc Lewis. We were colleagues for a while at U of T, and Marc's work on dynamical systems theory and emotion and development, and also his very seminal and I think important, and I've made that argument repeatedly, work on addiction and the framework of reciprocal narrowing. All of this is familiar to very many of you, and you can see those influences profoundly in my work. And so it's a great pleasure to have Marc here. Marc is also somebody who practices, investigates, and reflects on, with his considerable expertise, internal family systems theory and therapy. And we're going to talk about that. He's been watching some of the videos I've been doing with Seth Allison, Kazra, and others. And so he reached out to me and I said, of course, this is a great idea. And so that's why Marc is here. I'll turn things over to you, Marc. Welcome. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more as you see fit, and then we'll pick it up.
Okay, thanks, John. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me or accepting my hey, let's talk. We should do this on the air. I've been doing IFS as a psychotherapist. I'm a practicing psychologist in Toronto. But I've been doing it now for about 10 years. I started with just working with people who have addiction issues because IFS is so well suited for dealing with addiction problems. But now I use it, it's my go-to. I use it for whoever walks into my office, people who have all kinds of difficulties, depression, anxiety, PTSD, you name it. In fact, I no longer even think of addiction as being, a thing. It's a definition. You can apply it. You can define certain things as addiction or not, depending on your cultural and contextual and personal, uh, biases. But everyone's suffering. I mean, a lot of people are miserable and miserable for all kinds of reasons. And using substances, using them excessively, using whether it's porn or overeating or whatever, internet, over excessive internet use, it's just a way to regulate emotion. It's a way to help reduce suffering. And in that respect, I don't think of it as so much a specialized area of psychotherapy or investigation. However, there are things about substance use and other forms of addiction that really do make a lot more sense when you think about them in dynamic systems, in IFS terms, internal family systems terms. So we'll get to that, I hope. So that's it. I've been an academic for most of my career at the University of Toronto. Developmental psychology, child clinical psychology. I worked at OAZ. I was a student, then a prof there for years, then got into neuroscience of emotional development and how that seems to fall out with kids who have difficulties in emotion regulation, anxiety, uncontrolled anger, and how that leads to pathways that become extremely dysfunctional as they go on. And by the way, I'm not retired by any means.
Oh, I thought you were. I'm sorry. That's my mistake. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a natural label, but I'm not in academia anymore. But I'm certainly working. In fact, I just got a book accepted last week.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Yeah, it was. It took some doing. I went through this proposal. I think I did 7 drafts of the proposal before it was accepted by Penguin. Actually, Penguin Random House. So I'm delighted to be doing a book with Penguin, and a lot of work, but I'm doing it, and I continue to do that, and as well as being a practicing clinical psychologist.
Well, thank you, Marc. I should have just said retired from the university. Then I should have been more specific. So, a couple things like off the bat. I like this move you've made about sort of sitting addiction as maybe an exemplar or a prototypical case of a wider sort of issue that people seem to be coming in about suffering and emotional dysregulation, and how they use various substitution or surrogacy strategies to try and regulate that aren't maybe healthy. I think that's very powerful. I like I like the idea about. I think you slipped, but I think it's not a Freudian slip. I think it's a Platonic slip. I think dynamical systems and IFS do actually talk to each other a lot, and I think that's an important thing we might want to investigate. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then the other thing was, I mean, it was on your recommendation about IFS that I sort of took it up, and I just wanted to make people clear about
Oh,
that. That's I how much respect I have for your opinion on this matter. And I want to start with something. It was provocative. It provoked me into taking it up, so I'm going to repeat it. Now, it's not maybe not totally verbatim, and if it's off, you have every right to correct me. But you said something to the effect of, with John, with IFS, I can get to places in months that other therapies used to take years. And you said something like that to me, and that seems like a very interesting way of opening things up. It's a very provocative thing to say. It really influenced me. And I thought, oh, geez, if Marc says that, that's an important recommendation, right? So first of all, like maybe you don't stand by that anymore, but if you do,
I do.
yeah, okay. So open that up then, please.
Yeah, well, my original training way back when in the 80s was with psychodynamic theory and psychodynamic therapy, short term, perhaps not classical Freudian, certainly mostly object relations. But I got really inured, really I joined that camp for a while and I thought that was terrific. The insights and the understanding of people going that deep was great. However, psychoanalytic therapy, as we know, takes forever. And it also gets lost. It tends to get lost in narrative construction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, usually you end up with a narrative that both you, the patient, and the therapist can agree on. Oh, that makes sense. Yes, that would account for this. But, it's a fair bit of guesswork and it's a fair bit of a self-organizing, speaking of dynamic systems, a self-organizing story that the two of you put together intersubjectively, if you like. And it takes a long time and it's hard to get back to. It's hard to take it apart, take apart the pieces again and see if you can put them together in a different way. People don't normally do that. They leave with that understanding. Oh yes, that's about my mother and that's about my father. And well, maybe, maybe not. So with IFS, it's I mean, especially since Jung, there's been this idea that we have these components. Jung would call them complexes, which move towards archetypes and so forth. But they're complexes. They're little packets of meaning that are emotionally loaded and that are troublesome. That usually involve suffering, often shame, depression, isolation, anger, and so forth. And all the way up the timeline, to Fritz Perls and then ego state theory and transactional analysis. And now you've got schema theory as well as, IFS, of course, and quite a number of emotion focused therapy. A lot of these therapeutic methods have gravitated to the idea that we are composed of different parts.
Yeah, there's this convergence around it. I've been talking about that, the parts convergence that's sort of been happening, and how it's also sort of on the cusp of converging with this. I don't know what to call it. I think cognitive scientific is maybe the best grab bag. Of that the self is not a monadic substance, but this dialogical system internally and externally. And it's like these two things are like, and I'm trying to get these two groups to talk to each other and say, I think we're converging on something here.
And it's like, IFS obviously takes that as a premise. We don't have to get there. We start there, the idea of components. And when somebody walks into your office and, oh, what's all this about parts, really, I say, well, right now you're questioning me and you're probably wondering, you're kind of anxious and maybe a bit, it's hard to trust this stranger you've just started opening up to. So there's that part of you, but there's also the part of you that does feel dependent and needy and stuff like that. And the part of you that feels angry and maybe volatile and highly sensitive. And then when you go home tonight and have, too many drinks or whatever it is that you do, that's another part of you that's going to want to say, get me the hell out of here. I don't like feeling this way. I need to get high. So clearly that's got a kind of face value of it. It seemed very much like a separate part of us.
Well,
And
and it's
that's why,
perennial. Plato classically in the Republic, breaks the psyche up into different parts.
well, yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
there's that too, of course. So
Yeah,
yeah, Plato as well. Anyway, so long story short is it, well, exactly. Long story short, it takes the story and it makes it a lot shorter. You get right in there. You talk with the parts. There's a technique which is pretty well established. You can talk to these parts of yourself. Well, what does that mean? Who's doing the talking? Well, maybe let's find out about that a little bit later. We'll see. But for now, you can see that the parts kind of like being talked to and they might talk back to us. And once you get that dialogue going, that internal dialogue going, people really get it. And they get down to emotionally compelling, difficult, very emotional hot spots. A lot of shame, a lot of aloneness, a lot of helplessness comes right out to the surface. And there you are. You've got it in front of you. You can deal with it. And people start to feel better pretty quickly. 6, 8, 10 sessions, they're getting it. They're really getting it. And they go deep. So unlike CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and other modes of therapy these days, and DBT and all the rest, there's no there's no barrier in the archaeological dig. You can go all the way down to the bedrock, and you can get it right there on the table, and you can share it, and you can help people figure out how to relax those parts, how to soothe them, how to help them join in the dialogue, talk with you. What do they need? What's bothering them? What are they frightened of? Once that opens up, it goes pretty fast.
So one of the things I noticed, and I think that it's intended because, there's the self-therapy book, is that how well, like they were different, but, and they were complementary, but how well they were complementary. Like I would be doing this with somebody else, and then I would also be doing it on my own. And, and the two really, and it's different from CBT. Well, for me, CBT just feels like sort of stoicism light. And then it's missing all the whole ecology, but right. And it feels more like how can I put this? It's effective, and I don't want to deny that, reframing techniques, but it feels very technological intervention in my cognition, right? And whereas I feel like when like this resonance between what I'm doing with somebody else and then when I'm doing it on my own, like you said, it feels much more the whole of the psyche is involved, if I can put it that way. Uh, in both, like for example, if let me try. I'm not totally clear, but when you're doing sort of this, when you're doing the therapeutic work around CBT with somebody, it can feel very powerful, and you can feel very involved, and that's usually because of the rapport with the therapist. But then when you go and do it on your own, it feels very much like this technique. You're just practicing the homework. But with IFS, I found that both were deeply resonant. That's what I'm trying to get across. Does that sort of land as a reasonable thing to say?
For me, absolutely. In fact, that's a pretty special aspect of, I think, the way IFS is generally practiced, and I certainly embrace it, is that I want you to go home and I want you to try this yourself. It's just like the way we're doing it here.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down, relax, take a few deep breaths, see if you can feel what it's like inside your body, see if you can open up that space within you, and start to listen. See who's in trouble these days, which parts need attention, which parts want to talk with you about something, which parts of you feel in danger. So what's happening in the office and what's happening at home are very much linked. And I definitely want to, I think as Seth also said, IFS is fairly straightforward. The methodology is, you do this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to teach those methods, those steps to my clients, and I do, and they learn them pretty well. And they come home and they say, okay, I did that. And yeah, kind of good, was good, but it's not as good as when we do it together. And I say, okay, well, let's see what's different about it. And, you can make those two spheres connect more and more intimately. I think that's really important.
So let's agree. And I mean, I'm going to rely that we'll put the notes in. People can see Seth he did IFS with me, and we recorded that.
Yes. Yes.
And so people can have a concrete example of that. I want to now. I mean, you're not just an IFS therapist. You're also, I think it's fair to call you a cognitive scientist. You do work in psychology, you do work in neuroscience, etc.
Yeah.
And so, beyond the obvious things that we've already talked about, and although they're obvious, they're not trivial. That the self is much more dialogical than monological. Uh, and I want to get back to that because I want to talk at some point about some of the cultural pushback I've received about that point. So, although I think it's a fairly powerful point, um, I want to explore that with you a little bit. But before we do that, why is it so effective? And I mean, now I don't mean therapeutically. I mean stepping back. Is this plugging into something about the way the mind works? If like what would, and obviously I'm asking you to engage in theoretical speculation. We can frame it that way. That's what you're doing, but that's what I'm inviting too. What's your theoretical speculations and reflections about, okay, but why? I mean, you don't ultimately want an aspirin technology. Well, we do this technique and people feel better, right? It's like, right.
Why? It's something I think about every day,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, good.
I, that doesn't work, and it doesn't always work. There's 20-30% of people who just really don't get it. It doesn't work well for them. But for many, it does. Why? We used to talk about the ego back, in my hippie days. We talk about the ego. Oh yeah, that's that thing. That's that manifold of direction and certainty and knowledge and where I am focused. And that's the thing you want to get rid of when you drop acid and take mushrooms. You get rid of that thing. But it's not a thing. And when you go inside and you recognize it doesn't feel like a thing, it feels like different states. So a simple way of connecting that to people's sort of mainstream understanding of themselves, I think the parts are very much like mood states. They are recurrent mood states. That's quite different from Schwartz's way of thinking about these entities that have been with you forever or since
Yeah,
birth or
yeah,
whatever. I don't really buy that. I think they develop. And there's another aspect. They develop, which means to say we can find the part of you that is argumentative or angry or over dependent or excessively needy or domineering, and we can find that part of you when you were 5 and when you were sent to your room and when you were really mad and upset and lonely and helpless, and people can go back and find that, and oh yeah, that was pretty bad, that felt really shitty, and hey, it kind of feels like that now too, kind of, when you're in that situation, doesn't it? Yeah, it really does. So maybe that's also you. It's always been there. It's always been a part of you. It was started or was amplified or crystallized at moments in development, and it's still there. People can find it and go there and say, wow, okay, this is me also. And that's me. And the manager parts, the protectors, that they have intentions. Yes, I want to, I want to argue with you. I want to be right. I want you to like me. Those are all, very, they have strategy components. They have outputs. They have, motor components as well, and premotor components. And then there's the exiles, the parts that just feel like pure emotional states that are helpless and don't really know what to do and just kind of are waiting for somebody to come along and connect with them. And people recognize these as really what's happening in me now. So as to what I think they are and why I think it's effective, for a long time, I know you and I talked about this at many stages in our
mm,
academic evolution. There's cognition, and then there's emotion, and there's the cognitive system, and there's the emotion system. And then after, studying the brain for years, I began to realize, no, those are actually linguistic distinctions,
yeah.
cognition and emotion. The brain doesn't give a shit.
That's
It
right.
just does what brains do.
Yep. Yeah.
It does cellular synaptic synchronizing things. And we talk about the outputs as being cognitive, emotional, whatever. So when you talk about a mood state, you're talking about an emotion and an appraisal that lock together, that hold on to each other. This is how it feels. This is how it seems. This is how I see the situation. Pretty much the way I used to see it in high school when my teachers humiliated me or whatever it is. That's how it looks. That's the context. That's the frame. But it feels like this, and they come together, and it really is a state that lasts for a while. Sometimes it lasts all day long. Sometimes it comes back whenever I'm arguing with my wife or whatever it is, or feeling that I'm whatever, falling short in some other respect. Um, so seeing these things as recurrent states makes sense experientially. Theoretically, it makes sense because we could think of these states as consolidating, crystallizing over development through repetition of hot what Philip used to call hot cognition.
Right, right,
Uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're hot states. They're very emotionally compelling. So that, there's not a lot of other stuff going on in your mind when you're in one of those states of anger, or fear, or sadness, or aloneness, whatever it is, or fear, or anxiety. There's just that, and that state has a lot of cachet, and it will repeat over and over again for days, for weeks, for years, and be tied to certain contexts and certain ways of connecting with other people. And it gets strongly entrenched, strongly crystallized. So you can see, yeah, that's why it feels so familiar. It's right there. And it's probably going to stay there until you start to talk with that part and see if you can help it become a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more feel more safe, more taken care of, which is also a very important part of IFS.
So I want to zero in on right that and that moment, because I have some phenomenological experience and about that. I like this idea, that what these parts are is they represent sort of repeated and relivable sort of configurations of framing and feeling and identity. And we do this all the time, I think. And things come back. And, you can even do the Proustian thing. You can eat a cookie and you're suddenly back when you were like,
Yes.
all of that. I think, and I think that's tying it to that, I think is excellent. But there's that move that you put your finger on a minute ago that, and I remember phenomenologically, that's part of what uh, might be startling to people, or maybe they're wondering about, because all of that sounds fine and it just sounds like aspects of me. And then you talk to these parts and they
Yeah.
talk back. And
Yes.
that's a shift. That's a shift.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Now, a couple things just that I've thought about that is like, well, first of all, again, we do talk to ourselves, and there's a lot of research showing that that's not useless. We often get answers that come from other than the speaking part when we're talking to ourselves. And there's people who actually do good work on that. And I think there's some good cog sci coming out of that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, well, we do this in dreams. We have other people, and we're talking to them, and we're not aware of what's going on, right? They're not part. And so we do this. And of course, we also do it in ritual. We do it in theater. Like, so again, I'm trying to do what you're doing. I'm trying to bring in other machinery that people should be aware of and say, okay, because I'm trying to get at that magic moment, because that's what is, because for me, this is an intuitive sense. And so press back on it as you see fit. But part of why the therapeutic power is that magic moment that when you talk to it, it starts to tell you things. I know that the language gets weird here. It starts to tell you things you don't know or you haven't
Yes.
properly recognized.
Yes.
And you want to know, where's that coming from? Is that fair to, like,
Absolutely.
okay. Yeah.
In fact, that says it very, very well. I think there's that moment. I try to, sit down for 10 or 15 minutes a day. My meditation these days, I go straight into IFS land. I
Mm,
talk to my parts.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it works for me. And I try to get my clients to do that too, of course. But um, so for example, like I'll find a part of myself that something feels unsettled and not good and scary. And then I'll sit and talk with I'll sit and see who's there. And it's a part that feels young and it reminds me of being in boarding school and how miserable I was. And then I say, wow, I'm really feeling lonely. I'm lonely right now. I didn't realize I was so lonely. Yes, we are lonely. Yes, I am lonely. Yes, that's really how it is. There's nobody else there. Oh my God, that's no wonder you feel so anxious. No wonder I'm feeling so anxious. There is a, fusion and then a diffusion of self talking with and then becoming. And that in itself is pretty fascinating and mysterious. How do you move the subjectivity from the
Yeah.
okay, we're going to start talking about self in a minute. Might as well bring it in now. Capital S self that this is that's a very important part of IFS. The part of you that feels concern and empathy and compassion for your parts. The part of the aspect of you. They don't even want to call it a part, and I think that makes sense. A kind of a field of acceptance and caring, which connects, kind of to the Buddhist notion of non-self. Remarkably, ironically, they call it self. because it seems to come from within. And it's like, okay, I understand. Okay, that's rough, isn't it? Yes, it is. So it has the trappings of a dialogue, but it also, the subjectivity moves from here to there and back again.
Yeah, there's this weird thing of, and they talk about it in other work, like ally work and other things too, where you're doing this sharing your voice. Like there's times when you're speaking, and then there's times when you're sort of lending the inner voice to the part. And that's also um, really interesting as a phenomena, because um, it's surprising how I'm really struggling here. It's surprising how natural that feels and how odd that feels at the same time, right? It feels like, oh yeah, it feels like, yeah, yeah, and it's almost like, I don't know, I don't want to. I'm putting this in scare quotes, but it feels like, yeah, human beings used to always do this. This is how they always sort of were. And then we moderns, we have the buffered self, and that's why it's so odd or weird. But it's still odd because you get this weird sense of like, and we can talk about the self in a second, the self with a capital S. But it's because I sometimes I sometimes wonder, yeah, where am I, and how does that relate to the fact with the course I did, the Cox Eye show I did with Greg Enriquez on the elusive eye, how we talked about how, this idea of the imaginal eye locus. We move where we're talking from all the time,
Yes,
right? Right.
yes,
Like sometimes I'm talking from here, and sometimes I'm talking from here, and sometimes I'm talking from right now, and sometimes I'm talking from a self, like you said, that from boarding school and things like that. So just to open it, just reflect on this a bit. What do you think's happening there? Do you think it's like, similar to how, the two hemispheres can be semi-autonomous to each other? We know that. Or how in lucid dreaming you can get this weird double state where you're talking to other consciousnesses, but somehow they're in your consciousness. And like we have a lot of things where we get this sort of weird
yeah,
doubling. Do you think it's
yeah.
in that family, or
Good question.
yeah?
Um, I don't think it's quite like any of those things. When you start lending one's voice, doesn't really feel like that. Although I sometimes walk around the house and talk to myself, and I actually find that very helpful. It's going on in here anyway. Might as well listen, and peg it down with actual audible script. But sometimes often it really feels like they are talking. Especially, okay, addiction's a good example, or substance use. When my clients who struggle with substance use, I can say I can help them get to a place. I really want to get high. Yeah. So what's that like? Just like I know it's bad. Like no, don't worry about that for now. Yeah, you really want to get high. What's that feel like? I just want to like fuck. I mean, fuck everything. Like I don't care about what. That's right. You don't care, do you? No, I don't. And you can help people get into the place where that is actually their subjectivity lands in that place. I don't care about tomorrow. I don't care about next week. I know it sounds stupid. I know it sounds irresponsible or self-indulgent. Don't worry about that. We'll leave that for later. What does it feel like? It feels like I just want to feel better. I know how I can feel better. It feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels like something I can trust. Yes, and then you're not lending them your voice. They are talking. Like that part of them is talking.
No, maybe that was the wrong metaphor. What I meant is, I
I
mean,
think it's a good possibility, but it's a good thing that we have to figure out. It's not easy.
because what I'm trying to get at is, like, I found that writing with my parts was better than speaking. Um,
Yeah.
and part of me noticed that at some level, I'm giving them permission to write and to speak and to create images. That's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at, like, it's not okay. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there are people from a religious framework who said, oh, you're going to get into demonic possession. And I'm trying to say it's not like that. It's not like you lose like your agency. That's what I'm trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying. And maybe I'm using the wrong words. I'm not precious about the words. I'm trying to get at this sense of, yes, they speak to me, but I haven't lost agency. It isn't a possession state. Like
So there's a lot of back and forth, right? And we use metaphors like imagine yourself with your parts. We're going to the beach today. Okay,
Yeah,
we're on the
yeah,
yeah, right. So there's you, and then there's all your little parts, and they're all around you. Yes, and how does that? Well, they're kind of happy to be here. Happy to be here with you. Yeah, they're happy that I'm here, and you play with it until it starts to settle, and then you can go back and forth quite easily between the angry young. Yes, well, I never get my way. Nobody ever listens to me, but that there's other members of the family, and they're going to have their turn to speak too. So there's not really a huge amount of friction or incompatibility between talking as a part and the knowledge and understanding that there's more of us here. And by the way, you mentioned briefly something about the ancient Greeks. You often do, but the bicameral mind.
yeah, yeah.
Now we can imagine that voice is coming from elsewhere, from the gods, but I don't know. Is it like that? I mean, I wonder about that. Sometimes it helps to give them substance by helping in the way that I just mentioned to symbolize and metaphorize the
Yep,
context,
yep, yep.
right? The interactive context. And that's useful. And then once you get good at it, you can just do it. You can just plop along from one part to the next.
Okay, that's helpful. Let me try and say what a distinction that came up for me. I've done the empty chair technique where you move between the chairs, and this was very sequential. And I'm this, and now I'm that, and now I'm this. And I didn't get that with IFS. I got parallel. I got that I was with my part, and I'm going back, right? And that felt different to me. That's what I'm trying to put my finger on.
That's a really good question. And I think about that a lot too. Like sometimes it does seem sequential. It does seem like leapfrogging, like taking turns. It really does. Especially when you, with addiction again, very central example here. I'm in the fuck off place. I'm in the you know, I don't care what anybody says. I'm gonna get high. I've got my dealer's number. I've got enough money. Fuck everything. So, but you know that the critic is going to take his turn. You know what's coming down the pipes, and sure enough, and you can then give the floor. You can give the mic to the critic and say, okay, let's hear it. Yeah, I can't believe you're doing this again. You just said like 3 days ago, we're not going to do this, or just on weekends. Yeah, okay. And so then it does seem sequential. It does seem back and forth. But while you're in each part, I think over the therapeutic time frame, you're starting to develop a feeling that the rest of the parts are
Yeah,
here.
that's it. You don't lose the presence of the right. That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really useful. And I think Schwartz must have had that intuition from, early on because, well, why do we call it internal family systems? It's kind of a dumb name, actually, right? A lot of people recognize it doesn't really work very well, but it does feel like an internal family
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
And
Exactly.
people will often say, in the last, say, the second half of therapy, they'll say, I feel like we're all here together today and we're all kind of working together. Well, that's a cool thing to say, right? And to feel.
Thank you for watching. This YouTube and podcast series is by the Vervaeke Foundation, which, in addition to supporting my work, also offers courses, practices, workshops, and other projects dedicated to responding to the meaning crisis. If you would like to support this work, please consider joining our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. Okay, so that was very helpful. I really appreciated that back and forth, and you helped me get clearer about some of the questions. So, and now we move to, and you've seen everybody I've talked to about this, both online and off. I get a different answer about this. So, and this
Yeah.
is the self, capital S, which is like you said, very. It seems to shade off into the Buddhist non-self in some ways, as the basho for the parts, the field in which the parts are found and formed, and that's how, and I sort of broached that with Kazra. I said, is the self more like that sort of developmental field that's carrying out the imperatives of trying to bring about inner harmony and contact with reality? He liked that.
He
Um,
would.
Whereas Seth, I seem to get the sense of him that it was a little bit more like the Jungian notion, uh, um, so that's just a long preamble, and I put my own cards on the table, and because I'll say it this way, and I've got indirect feedback from Seth from Richard Schwartz. I'm unhappy about his ontology around the self and the way he talks about it, and he's got this other thing in his ontology, the seat of consciousness. Uh,
That's Schwartz does. You're talking about Schwartz now.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, and
Yeah, go on.
yeah, and so and like is that and that's sort of like that feels like that where the imaginal thing is, but you can be off stage and something else can be in the seat. I found it confusing.
You've got it. You know, you've taken us right into the deepest part of the swamp. I think
Yeah,
so.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It is murky, and I remember that conversation about the seat of consciousness, and I've also had that confusion. I don't think it's well developed. I agree with Seth that IFS works well as a therapeutic engagement, but it doesn't work very well as a theory.
Right,
Remember how he put
right.
that?
Yeah, yeah. He
It's
did make that distinction.
experience, no,
Good.
it's good at that, but it's not good at experience distant. And he talked about being in the bathroom with Schwartz at that conference.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Schwartz said he was nervous because he was talking to like 200, PhDs or MDs. He thought, I don't know if this really holds up as a theory. Um, okay, so to get right to the heart of the matter, it's like I seat of consciousness. IFS has this concept of unblending, which is really important, which means you can be in the part or you can unblend from the part, pull back from it, and then talk with it, talk to it. You can't talk with it when you can't talk to it when you're being it, because there's only one of you. But when you pull back, then you can. Ideally, Schwartz wants to say that's when you're in self or more in self. From that enfoldment, from that manifold, you can look at the part and say, wow, you're really suffering. It's really miserable, isn't it? Yeah, it really hurts. Yeah, I get that. And I really feel for you. That's really hard to put into a theoretical landscape, but it's a very distinct feeling. So, what else? When you're unblending, is the seat of consciousness going from the part to the self? It's not that simple. Sometimes you can the seat of consciousness can be much more diffuse and flexible and fluid, and that sounds more like self, that feeling of embracing a lot of perhaps chaos, um, and then sometimes it feels very, very focal. Sometimes it feels, I'm right here and I care about you and I love you. And that's pretty focal.
yeah, yeah,
So that okay. So seat of consciousness that follows. As far as the more diverse or spread out sense of things, it doesn't work well in terms of talking about the seat of consciousness or unblending. Also, when you unblend from one part, you might very well be going into another part. And people will often say, okay, I think I'm in self now. Well, no, I don't think you really are, actually. You're in the part that wishes you were in self. You know, you're in the sort of guide part or the what they often call the champion. A champion is like a part of you that really has your best interest in mind and is trying to help you and care for you. What's that? Well, I think of that as a kind of conduit to self, to that other kind of awareness. But it's also very much a part because it's focal and it has an intention. That's what parts are definable because they have feelings, they have a cognitive frame, and they have an intention.
yeah,
They have they have a wish, right? And that wish can be sometimes almost, I want to scream. I want you to take care of me. I want you to like me, or I hate you and I want to kill you. Those are all possible intentions that parts can have. When you're in self, it's different. You don't, the intention isn't there. Or if it is, I'll just finish. If in self, the intention is caring for. I'm here to care for you. I don't know why that's different, but it is in an important way.
yeah. I thank you. That was no, no,
It's
no, no. I mean,
to get a few other colors here.
no, 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 no. We're in good faith dialogue here. Um, mm, I think well, I have two things. One is I have a concern that if the theory isn't worked out, the normative questions about when are you doing it right and when are you doing it wrong get murky as well.
Yes.
So that's a problem. Um, um, and so that's one of the reasons I'm bringing it up. Um, and the other is like, well, I mentioned this to you. Um, there's definitely a way in which there's things that are roles within us. And I'm just going to use these two terms, and they're not perfect, but the parts feel more like roles come to life, like
Yeah. Yes.
like a role in a play, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Whereas there's functions in us too, and that's what I was trying to explore with Kazra. That the self feels more like this field function that's trying to bring about inner harmony and bring about getting closer to what's really going on, and it feels more like that.
Yes. But the thing about, but as soon as you introduce the word trying, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah, it's not trying so that's why I'm trying to use the word function. It functions too, right? And that's yeah, good correction, thank you. So yeah, it functions too, just like your immune system is functioning to fight off a
Nice.
pathogen, and it's got
Nice.
very
Yes.
complex dynamics, and it's very self-corrective, and it can do a lot of things, but it doesn't ever show up in my phenomenology as a role. And right.
Right.
And that's what
Yes.
I was trying to pull apart. And to me, that I think, because I've had a similar intuition, and I'm seeing if the similarity goes along with you, that the self is more like the Buddhist notion, which is not a soul, but like the basho, the field function that is the holding place, that is that which in which things are forming and arising and passing away in a codependent fashion. That's how I experience it.
It does feel like that. You're right. And, I'll tell you another thing about self, capital S self. People really do experience it differently. So you don't want to necessarily tell people
Yes.
this is what it's like.
Yeah.
And for me, the different ways I can experience it, sometimes it's very much of a caretaking feeling. The way I feel, not what, the way I do feel towards my children. Like, I'm here for you. I care about you. If you're miserable, I really feel for you. And I want to help you. Well, that's kind of an intention, but it's like a macro intention or a diffuse intention, right? So there's that. Sometimes it's more like pure compassion, like pure, no, let me put it differently. Sometimes it's more like pure uh, um, acceptance, just being here and observing and noticing. We use the word noticing a lot, just noticing what's there and not trying to interfere, just being present, which just really goes now with the idea of mindfulness meditation and other practices of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
meditation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So, okay. So there's that. So in other words, I can see self sometimes as having more and more of a focus, like I want to help you, I want to be there for you. And here's another, and other times much less so. It's just I'm a presence. I'm more like just the universe noticing your consciousness. Yeah, so whatever. Those words are, it's really hard to find the
No,
word
no,
for.
no, and you understand. I'm receiving everything you're saying with a huge degree of hermeneutic charity. We're struggling here. We're really struggling with something. Yes, you're right, and I want to reinforce that. I don't want to claim that the phenomenology is always homogeneously the same. But I was trying to land on what the fundamental ontology might be. Just
Man, it's a struggle. It
yeah,
is. We're trying to understand this. It's a pretty big mystery. And that's one of the other great things about IFS. It's taken all of this mystery and packaged it into a therapeutic
yeah.
approach. How cool is that?
Yeah. That's very good. And that's why I can see how it could. Okay, so that leads to another question then, right? And very good segue, and you sort of triggered it earlier in me, triggering in the good sense of the word triggering. You sparked in me.
I don't mind triggering, but
um, this seems like it can very readily, and this gets into some of the other conversations I've been having. This can shade from a therapeutic practice into let's call it a spiritual practice, in which the alleviation of suffering, while never absent, is no longer the focal thing. It could be something more like the aspirational telos of maturation, or becoming in the proper humble scare quotes, wiser, more reflective, more able to deal with, face up to reality, deal with complex situations, stay integrated as a person. And these concerns are seen across many spiritual wisdom, religious traditions, I think. And you said, your mindfulness practice sort of shades into IFS, sort of seamlessly. So what do you think about that? And what are the, obviously, first of all, does that land for you? And then secondly, what are the powers and perils of that connection? One of the nice again, in scare quotes, around sort of some of the other therapies like CBT is you do the therapy and you leave it alone. Now, I have a criticism of that. That's what I meant when I said it's stoicism light. Yeah, but it's leaving out like people's larger existential and spiritual concerns. So, sorry, this is a very John Vervaeke question, but I'm John Vervaeke, so I'm allowed to
Okay,
ask it.
I'll break it down a bit. But I think you're on something important, really important here, on a few things. First of all, when you talk about the role and the value and the intent of this position of self, well, now you're talking about it as a theoretician. You're trying to be theoretically astute, which is what you do, which is terrific. We need that to communicate about things. When you're doing it, when you're actually in the trenches doing it, it's different. It doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, but it has a very distinct feeling to it. And that feeling is really good. When I can help people get to that feeling where they feel, wow, this is different. Like, this is not like talking to a person. This is not talking to someone who has some pushback or is going to respond and say, well, I disagree. Rather, it's a very different kind of conversation,
Yeah.
and they get it and they feel tremendous relief. It feels good. Well, it's that simple. It just feels really good to be in that place and to let everything else kind of like cascade away. Because everything's okay. As Schwartz says in his latest book, no bad parts. They're all, they're hi there. Hi, how are you? And that's part of it. But the other thing I wanted to mention, IFS is very much interested in emotions. It's all about emotions. Unlike CBT and unlike some other forms of therapy, they might talk about, or emotion might be in some part of the uh, outskirts of the work, but it's not central. In IFS, it's very, very central. I think the parts are organized around emotions. And this is what Jung would say too about his complexes. He literally says they are organized around emotions, which of course he says that's unconscious or whatever. Well, I don't even worry about that distinction anymore. A lot of stuff is partway between conscious and unconscious. In a way, who cares? It's all happening. So the emotional stuff is like, what was I going to say? I don't remember.
Well, could I probe a question then? Because I want,
Yeah.
right. So, I want to I want to give a full emotional tone to this notion of feeling good. It's not like feeling good when you're eating ice cream. It's a much more, well, at least to my mind, it's a much more healing, comprehensive. Like it's there's it's therapeutic. It's not
Okay.
right. Okay,
Yes.
now, and this is the question I wanted to ask. Right? Maybe I can frame it this way. Could IFS, I sort of use it this way and other people do, could it be that feeling good in the service of being good, of becoming a good person, which is a deeper question? It's not a therapeutic question. It's a question about what kind of person should I be? It's an existential, spiritual question. And do you think, so this is the question, that IFS can be used that way? That's one question. And then the related question is, should it be used that way?
So I've got one client right now who is so nasty to his wife. I've got a few people, right? And I want to say, don't talk to her like that. Are you crazy? You're just hurting her. I mean, why
Yeah.
would you do that? So that's about the utility and trying to help that person be a better person. But if I go there, if I articulate that, that's just going to call up their their critical part. Is going to say, yeah, John, you're being, this guy's name happens to be John. You're being that a schmuck again. I mean, come on, you know better. What the hell are you trying to do? But that's not who I want to talk to right now. I want to talk to the part of you that's needy and that feels ignored and feels quashed and feels, invisible. That's the part I want to talk to you right now. So you can't really share. Does this make sense? You can't really share with the person what you feel is the shouldness about it. You kind of have to leave that.
Yeah, I know. I want to be clear. I don't want to bring the question I'm asking into the therapeutic context. I want to talk about John Vervaeke doing this practice on his own, and sometimes it'll be for therapeutic issues. But it seems very analogous to other practices, deity yoga and other practices where
Meta.
yeah,
Meta comes to
yeah,
mind, right?
exactly. So, and obviously, the intent in meta is not just therapeutic. The intent in meta is transformational, right? You're trying to get at at more primary existential modes, the kind of like at the sort of the fundaments of your agency and identity, and and it seems to me that because IFS goes deep, it could do that. Now, that's a theoretical question. Then there's the separate question: is should it do that? Would that be abusive? Would that be mistaken? Would people end up doing the wrong thing, or is there a way in which that could be practiced? Like I'm trying to like
How could it be wrong? What exactly do you mean? Why would it be? How could it be wrong? I mean, I think you're onto something, but I'm just not sure
no,
how to
no,
how
no.
you.
That's a completely legitimate question. It's like there. Okay, so let's do what I hope is a non-controversial example. You have a therapeutic technique, and you're getting into a confrontation with your spouse, and you bring that therapeutic technique to bear, and that is the wrong thing to do because they don't want to be your client, they want to be your spouse. And you're assuming this is an existential mistake. You're assuming the wrong identity, the wrong role, the wrong form of agency, right? And right, so there are times when we can use therapeutic things improperly in the wrong context. Is that so? I don't have a specific in mind. I just have the generic. Maybe it's possible that when people try to use IFS for spiritual aspiration, they could be doing something inappropriate in that way.
I see what you're saying. Well, first of all, like as the therapist, I can hold on to a lot of that stuff. I don't have to hand it to the client on day 3 and say, "Hey, here's what we're doing here, and it's going to make you a better, more comprehensive, caring person." I don't have to do that. At the very end, we can say, "Hey, by the way, by the way, I seem to be getting along better with people. By the way, I seem to be nicer with my kids these days."
Right.
Oh, that's I was kind of hoping that might happen, but they don't have to carry that with them. So that's part of it.
But I'd be worried if it didn't transfer. I mean, one of
Me
the
too.
yeah, and one of the problems with some therapies is that issue around transfer, right?
I don't really see how it can go wrong. If you are becoming more forgiving, caring, compassionate towards your own ugly parts, if
Okay,
it,
let me give you one example then. And I'm not claiming this is the case. This is a Godonkin experiment. People could use this to do a kind of spiritual bypassing and refusal of responsibility by saying, well, that's my critical part and he struggles. That was me. That was the part of me that's needy. Can you just understand that? And there's a way in which people could, avoid
I see.
proper responsibility by deferring to their parts and the agency that their parts have.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So people do sometimes tend to do that. And if that comes into therapy, then I want to say to them, that sounds like the part of you who really wants to make them a nicer, better, more caring person to you so that you can depend on them and rely on them instead of feeling anxious about maybe they really are mad at you, maybe they really don't like you deep down. So you can always bring it back to the part of you that is wishing to make this change in the relationship. Yeah, probably you really do need it to be different. And you'd love to teach her how to be a better listener. Of course you would. So you connect to the part. And you always connect to the part. You always go to that part of you that has needs and fears and concerns. So then if you do that right, they won't be trying to like bring it home as, hey mom, today we looked at chapter 3 on whatever on long division. Like the tendency to bring that home and try to make it work at home like that, no, it doesn't work very well, and you can put people off that trail. Like, no, this is about, let's care about you right now, let's see what you need, and let's see how you're trying to get it. And if that's not working, well, okay, maybe that's not working. Maybe you need to care for that part. Maybe you need to be there. maybe that part really needs to have your compassion and understanding if it's not getting hers, for example.
That's good. That's a very good answer. Do you think then one of the functions, I'm trying to use my language carefully, of the self is to prevent an infinite regress? You know, Vellman worries about, he talks about Hamlet, how you can always step back and, well, you know, but there's the deeper part behind, and behind that is the deeper part, and behind that is the deeper part. Wow, when you did that move, you just did, that was the therapeutic part of you. And you see what I mean? And like, like, how do you know when you've stepped back far enough?
You as the subject,
The person doing it, not the therapist with somebody.
right,
You as somebody
right.
who's doing it. Yes, exactly.
Well, you don't know for sure, but you can always, often you can get in touch with the part of you that's trying to make sense of things. Often people will find a part of themselves that looks familiar, looks kind of like what we used to call the ego,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
main manager. There's some cute cartoons I've gotten off the web to just show this guy sitting there with surrounded by computer screens and papers and notes and things and working, is it all together? Have I missed anything here? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can bring people in touch with that aspect of themselves and they might say, oh, that's me. Of course yeah. Well, but it doesn't all work smoothly, really, does it? No, it doesn't really. But wouldn't it be nice if it did? Yeah, it really would. So you can feel that yearning, you can feel that wish to have it under control. Control feels good, but sometimes it feels elusive. Sometimes it feels like you can't find it, you can't get it. Let's care about that part. Let's just see if we can say, it's okay, guy. It's not all under control. It's okay. Let it go for a while. And then you go to self. Then you say, it's okay. I'm here. I'm with you. I get it.
Right.
You're not all alone. I'm with you. That is a bizarre, by the way. I learned a lot of this stuff from my consultant. I never learned IFS in the normal formal channels. I never got into it. I sat in on some trainings, but I never actually took them in the proper order or anything. But I learned what I know from the person named Sykes, Sykes. She's wonderful. She's brilliant. She has a recent book that came out about IFS for addiction, for addictive disorders, and she really gets it. Gets the polarization between the firefighter, I just want to get high part, versus the critic, I can't believe you're doing this again, you idiot, asshole, whatever. She gets it, and she taught me a lot. And one of the things she taught me was this way of talking to your parts, where you can actually say, "I care about you. I'm here for you." When I say this to clients, I often have a preamble. I know this sounds stupid, or I know this sounds silly. I don't say stupid. I know this sounds a bit silly. I know this sounds kind of weird, but try it. See what it feels. See how it works.
I just want to reinforce this point because for me, even the moment of just acknowledging the presence of a part is in and of itself tremendously helpful. It just, like, sometimes, and I probably am in error at times, but sometimes it feels like that's all that's wanted. They just want, that part just wants to be recognized. It just wants to be
Yes, but
acknowledged.
then who's doing the recognizing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the immediate question.
Yes. Yes. But that's where
And
I
yeah,
get concerned about the infinite regress, right?
yeah,
And what you seem to be saying is, you at some point you step back into self. At some point.
exactly. That is the answer. I
Yeah.
mean that.
Yeah.
Okay, class, this is the answer. That's what you have to remember. Um, but it is that, and like, just try it out. Say, I care about you. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know who the I is or the you, and just try it. And so I'll get the person to say, I really care about you. Notice what that feels like. Does that feel fake? No. How does it feel? It feels really good. You don't necessarily have to get it perfectly, with certainly not with the left hemisphere,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But there's something there that people really perceive it. It has a clarity to it and a crystallization that they can take with them.
Yeah. And I want to be very clear on this point. I don't want to impose on that at all with these questions. This is me stepping back and trying
We
to.
want to understand, of course, we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, like I say, there is a practical issue about, if we don't put some thought into the theoretical reflection and the normativity, then we don't know when we're doing it well or poorly. It just becomes this nebulous.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
By the way, I've got a good friend who's also a religious scholar who explained to me about John Wesley, and Methodism, and the idea is that once you get this moment of realization that God loves you, and you, despite all your sins and all the bad shit is all on the table, and He still loves you, and um, and wow, and that feels really terrific. How did you get there? Um, 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 okay, we need to remember exactly what you did. First, you got your sins on the table. Now it sounds a bit like AA
yeah,
because there's a 7
yeah.
steps. First, you did that, and then you did this, and now you did this, and now it feels like that. It's really, really useful to help to give people a definitive methodology that they can take.
It is. So this we're coming close to the end, but this gives me the
Oh,
last topic I
there's so
wanted.
much more to talk
Well, we can talk again, but and that's what I was asking earlier about sort of the spiritual dimensions of this, and I was trying to, bring up the possibility that it can be not only therapeutically but spiritually beneficial to people. But I've received quite a bit of pushback, and I don't want to make it sound. I'm not talking about trolls because that's one that's just that's a sui generis
about.
thing, right? But I'm talking about people and expressing genuine love and affection and concern around this. That that I'm opening myself up to demonic influence. Some people are very wary, I should say, sorry, of there are no bad parts,
Mm,
right, and
that's
yeah, and things like that, and then and then and I talked with Seth about the experience I had with this much more archetypal, and here I have to use the Jungian language because the IFS language doesn't quite seem to work, figure. And many other people have had this same kind of experience with the ally, right? And that has also a lot of reverberations through a lot of religious traditions. So I don't think it's just an idiosyncratic weird thing with me. I think I could make a good case. And those things have been provocative in the sense that people have been very disturbed, and part of it I think is Charles Taylor's right. We've crafted this notion of sort of the soul, the buffered self, the singular, totally substantial one thing inside, and this is trespassing on that. And I understand that, but there seems to be something more, and I'm trying to get at. Um, do you obviously probably not with your patients, but do you, when you're talking to people, your fellow academics or just people at large, do you get any of that kind of, I don't know what to call it, cultural reactivity to IFS? It's like, well, that's weird, or this is strange, or and maybe from a religious angle, oh, that sounds like very like you're talking to demons, and um, uh, uh, yeah, and
I don't talk to people like that.
well, okay. Well, then maybe it's unique, well, not unique to me, but maybe it's something we don't share. Uh,
Go on. I'm listening. It's yeah. I think that's a really, really interesting. I haven't thought about it much at all, but I don't get a lot of pushback, partly because when you talk to people about IFS, they either know about it and they kind of are into it and they kind of get it, and then they're all over it and they say, "Yeah, tell me more. Let's talk more." Or else they say, "I don't know what the fuck you're talking about." It sounds pretty weird. I'm not finding that there's a segment, there's a subgroup that finds
you
it.
might get it from this video, by the way. So just to warn you that that might happen. Look, and I want to say this as charitably. I'm not trying to say something that is ridicule. There are people who are concerned that the only voice in their head should be Jesus.
Yeah, yeah.
And they mean that in a deeply committed fashion. And they're willing to say that maybe they have a conscience, and that's also sort of allowed. And conscience and Christ are the two voices that should be in their head, and there shouldn't be any other there. Uh, that's kind of the concern.
So as soon as you say shouldn't, and it becomes a moral issue, or
Yes, yes,
normative, I guess I should say,
yes,
issue,
yeah.
then it's your kind of, well, to me, unfamiliar ground, really. But I'll tell you the idea. We when we think about the internal critic, and he can be so nasty, he can be
Sadistic.
so
Yeah.
sadistic, absolutely vicious. So, do you really want to say that that's a part of you that kind of got sidetracked and got, kind of corner, got painted himself into a corner so that his one, like what my go to for that is like, that guy's critical because he really actually is so frustrated that he can't make you be good. He's been trying so long for so hard in so many ways to make you be good, to make you stop being self-indulgent and stupid or aggressive or whatever it is. And that's why he's so harsh. So that's really that's one way of dealing with it. And that's like the no bad parts way. But yeah, some people say that critic is so nasty. You're really stretching things here to say that he's just another part. It sounds as though, and who knows, maybe it is a reflection of all the bad shit. I just started watching the Hitler documentary on Netflix. Like, where does this stuff come from? You want
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when maybe there really is evil. It sure seems like it, and just kind of floats around and finds a nice, fertile place to land and grows. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not very good at thinking about things that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough, Mark. And please understand, I wasn't expecting you to give a definitive judgment. I just
No,
wanted,
that's
yeah,
no, it's really interesting, John. The question itself is interesting. Why is he? And I get asked this by patients all the time. You're asking me to forgive that voice. You're asking me to understand him and like try to make him feel better. He's such an asshole. He's so horrible. I've got one woman who has been pulling her hair out for decades, and every time she looks in the mirror, she can't believe how ugly she looks, and she gets that there's an internal voice who says, "Look at you. Look, how can you go out in the world like that?" And we recognize how nasty and hostile and vicious it is, and yet and I go back and I try to get where that comes from in childhood. And yes, her father was incredibly judgmental and her mother was incredibly weight conscious. And you can do it, but it starts to feel like a bit of a strain. Where was I going with this? I don't know the answer, but I'll tell you that voice really does seem incredible. You know what? Where I go to with that, this might seem silly, but I often try to. I say, remember the Wizard of Oz, and you have this huge, horrible,
yeah,
booming
yeah, yeah,
voice,
yeah.
right?
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So he's awful and he's mean. And he says you have to go all the way back to the beginning, go back to the poppy field. You did it all wrong. You're stupid idiots, and you're never going to get anywhere. And then the little dog pulls the curtain aside, and you see a little guy there.
Yeah.
Pay no attention to,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can actually feel some compassion for the critic.
I think that's profound, and I think that's sort of ironically a very Christian thing to say. Uh, um, um, I guess here's the concern. I don't know if I have this concern. I'm giving voice to it. Okay, so let's be very clear about that. But couldn't a part be ultimately manipulative and lying? You're assuming that the part is ultimately adaptive or something like that. And what if the part, is actually doesn't want to be changed, doesn't want to be healed, but wants to take over? Like I said, I'm not sure I believe any of what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give voice.
Well, I think that absolutely goes with the whole sense of IFS. Some parts don't want to be changed. They don't want to be looked at. They don't want to talk with you. So he's taught me how to think about this. You don't. You can say, especially to some of these exiles that are really drowning in shame, it's okay. You don't have to talk to me right now. You don't even have to look at me. You don't have to listen to me. But I'm still telling you, I'm close by. And if you need me, if you change your mind, if you want to look up for a second, I'll be here. Well, that's an interesting way of talking to a part that doesn't want to talk. And sometimes it works beautifully.
Is it possible for maybe I'll make this more stark? That's helpful. Is it possible for the parts to lie? I don't mean me be mistaken, right? Is it because they are an intention, and you've emphasized that, and they're an intention other than, I don't know what to call it, the agentic self or something, right? Right? They're, right?
Yeah.
One of the
A
things,
very,
one
very
of the, one of the
interesting.
things that intentional agents can do is lie.
What a cool question. I've never thought about that per se.
Yeah.
I'll think about it. I'll get back to you. I don't know the answer. Can they lie? In a sense, they're they can certainly defend themselves against all, bring up whatever silly, argument presents itself at the moment. They can do that. Just as we did when we were, 13 or 14 years old, say whatever came to mind, right? Was that a lie? Well, yeah, kind of. So I guess they can still do that. I don't know what to call it though.
Yeah. And like I said, it was really an open question. I'm trying to give voice to something that I'm not sure about. Um, uh, but I, I, I'm making a supposition that perhaps what some people are worried about is that there are liars inside, that will actually not say what their real intent is, not disclose themselves in they can be, and I'm trying to make a distinction here between being mistaken and being partial. That's fine. There's a, even calling them parts is an acknowledgement of that fact. So that's not the issue. The issue is, could they malevolently lie? And that, I think that might be part. I don't know if it's clear, and I'm trying to get clearer than perhaps these people are when they voice these concerns. But that's what I'm
Yeah,
sort of
sure.
landing on.
Well, you should. That's your job,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
a philosopher and a psychologist and cognitive scientist. I'll tell you one thing. I often, when I go in with people, what I see is a jumbled up hall of mirrors where signals and needs get reflected off so many surfaces. They're just a mess of often very ironic, cynical, twisted, even 180 reversals. What is projection? You project bad stuff onto another person, and you think it's in them. Well, maybe, not maybe, parts certainly will do that. They do that. And I've got one guy who he would say, I keep getting these images of wanting to kill my mother with an axe.
yeah,
Well, do you really feel that way? No, not really. But what's it doing there,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you can say it's maybe an evil influence of some sort, but you can also say it's a signal bouncing around from mirror
Yep,
to mirror to mirror
yep.
in some strange way that the mind seems capable of doing.
I want to be really clear. I will not agree, because of argument and good evidence and reason, of any kind of religious reductionism, to say no, it must just be evil. No, I think very frequently it's exactly what you said. It's no, there's actually it's actually better to understand this as the man behind the curtain, as a maladaptation, as a partial perspective, as something that's been trapped by developmental delay in some way.
Yes.
I'm totally. I was trying to give voice to: is there a is there a legitimate concern above and beyond that the parts could be, you know, in some sense liars, and therefore the a doorway, a portal for evil to land within. I think that's the concern.
Taking off track and that, yeah. I don't know. I think if you do it well and honestly and clearly and you have the right guidance, that's not something that concerns me.
Right.
I'm not worried about that
That, I
myself.
guess that might be a concern from some people. Maybe me. I'm not sure if people take this up and they're doing it now outside of a therapeutic context on their own within a spiritual sort of orientation and something like that.
There's a guy named, I don't know if you've run across this, his name is Lucas Forstmeyer.
You know?
If you Google him, he's got a really cool video series on IFS. Just Google Forstmeyer, it's phonetic German, Forst, on IFS, and he takes you through it step by step by step by step, and he's really good at it. Better, I think, in some ways, cuts to the chase more quickly and more clearly sometimes than some of the books on IFS. And what he says, um, where was I going with this? He was saying, with respect to the exiles, don't rush in there. It
Yeah,
can be
yeah,
dangerous territory. It can be really murky and confusing and difficult, and you can suddenly meet with geysers of opposition and misunderstanding emotions and intentions that will floor you, confuse you, and maybe get you into all kinds of trouble. So maybe you really do need guidance to deal with the darker places in here.
yeah. I mean, I don't think people should take this up without practicing, like, with other people, uh, and sometimes with a therapist. Um, I have open questions about the degree to which, um, sorry, I have open questions about what should be the proper pedagogical preparation before people take this up as a practice they're doing on their own as a daily kind of thing. Should people go through some kind of therapy first, or should they at least do partnered versions of IFS for a significant amount of time before they do a purely individual one?
Yeah, you need some of that. It's too difficult to just jump in there and listen to some guided meditation app, and Schwartz has these things with trailheads and stuff, and 10 or 15 minutes, and then then you're there. No, it's much more difficult than that. There are subtleties and concerns, and even perhaps dangers of going in too quickly without practice.
Well, I would request invite people in the IFS community to perhaps give some thought about that pedagogical issue, because I'm concerned that there's a gap. There's sort of people in therapy, and then there's the books and the self therapy, and then there's a pedagogical gap
Yeah,
there
I
about,
agree.
yeah, but maybe people shouldn't just pick up the book. Maybe the books are good, and there's this is intended to be something you can do on your own. But maybe you do a lot of partner work first, maybe even some therapy first before you pick it up on your own. I don't know, but I think that's an important pedagogical issue that needs to be addressed.
I agree. I totally agree. I think so too. And I don't think, I think going in there alone is not the best idea because I think it can be too difficult.
Well, Mark, I think this is a good place to close. This was
Yeah,
fantastic.
for sure.
Maybe we can think of a follow up, or, um, but I always like to give my guests, first of all, gratitude. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Me too.
Um, and it was excellent to move with you between the theory and the
Yeah,
therapy and back and
for
forth.
sure. If we do talk more about it, it would be nice to introduce developmental issues. Where does it come
Yes.
from in our
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
our
Yeah. Okay.
a huge area?
Yeah, I'm very interested in that too. Yeah, the dialogical developmental self, and how that's very different from our older models. But so that, okay, I've noted that. But I also like to give my guests the last word. Anything you want to say? It can be summative, it can be provocative, it can be cautionary. However, what's the last word you want to leave with the viewers of this video?
Well, I think IFS is, it's emergent. It's still kind of in its infancy. Yes, it comes from a long line of practices and theoretical approaches that try to look at this at oneself in terms of parts or components that are interacting with each other. But it's still kind of new and finding itself, and it's a little bit vulnerable to being taken over by different opinions, forces, including its own founders, as often happens, right?
Mm-hmm,
So you
mm-hmm.
want to be, we don't know exactly where it's going. Maybe it's just opening doors and we're not sure what's on the other side of those doors yet. And it would be good to continue to pursue it and ask these. And I'm really happy that you're confronting these questions and asking them. I think that's exactly what we need to do.
Well, thank you. I'm going to keep doing that, and I hope you keep doing what you do. And it's
Great.
been a great pleasure, Mark.
Yeah, me too. All right, John. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.